would you have a statue of Jimmy Savile up in a public space? Yes or no?
Well, I mean, that's an abstract question because there isn't a statue of Jimmy Savile.
Would you?
It is a good question.
Would you?
I mean,
Would you
I
think
wouldn't
that'd be
put
okay?
one up. And there were lots of people who were very concerned that heritage was being destroyed.
This is
statues
the famous
down.
example. This is Bristol. This is Edward Colston. And remind us, oh yeah, here we are. I was going to say, remind us what happened. It went in the river.
Straight to the bottom of the harbour. And there were lots of people in local areas who were really worried about their heritage being graffitied. Pubs have been vandalised because of the pubs' names. And so what we wanted to do was try to really empower basically local people to help them to petition, to give them a platform to express their concerns about what was happening to heritage. And so we've done things like petitioning to keep statues there, fundraising and that kind of thing.
Right.
Often people on your side of the argument say that we need to not erase our history, we need to learn from our history. Yet when it's actually in a museum where people actually go learn about it, you then stop people from doing that. And I just have to ask the fundamental question of, why do societies build statues? Why do they do it? Why do people build statues of people? What's your answer to that question?
Well, it depends on where you are in the world. So the history of statues in the UK is that we have a very plural public space. So we have statues that, there's no particular narrative. It's not, top-down government saying, these are the statues we're going to have. A lot of the Victorian statues were put up by subscription. Local people wanted to honour local philanthropists and so on. Whether or not they have an ambiguous history, that is the reason why the statues are
So
there.
can we agree they were honouring somebody at the time?
Yeah, so,
Right.
a society builds a statue to somebody who they admire, who they believe represents their values. Does Edward Colston represent our values?
Well, it's not about whether or not these statues represent our values now. When we inherit statues or any kind of heritage from the past, obviously different periods of history have different standards of morality, of ethics and so on. But my argument would be that when we're talking about the public space in Britain, because as I say, we have this plural public space where things stand in tension. My favourite example of this is the statues in Westminster of Charles I in an eternal face-off with Oliver Cromwell. Now, those are two things that are inherently in tension and in conflict. So what you should do is put more statues and more monuments into the public space and accept that our history is what it is. That is represented in the public realm, rather than trying to edit things in accordance with each generation's morality. We have to inherit those things
but that's
and
precisely
pass
the
them
thing.
on.
If the aim is to have it be for historical purposes, and there's no problem with putting them in a museum, as we just established, societies put up statues of people they admire. It would be an incorrect analysis. Looking back on now, for the future generations, look back on now, and they see we had statues of slave traders still up in public spaces. That is a distortion of history from their perspective. Now, for example, would you have a statue of Jimmy Savile up in a public space? Yes or no?
Well, I mean, that's an abstract question because there isn't a statue of Jimmy Savile.
It is a good question.
Would you?
I mean, I
think
wouldn't
that'd be
put
okay?
one up, but I mean,
Would you think it'd be okay? If one was up outside your house in your high street, would you be okay with that statue being there? A statue of Jimmy Savile?
Well, I think that this is, we're not talking about somebody like Jimmy Savile.
Sorry, Edward Colston murdered thousands of black people. He's kind of a bad guy.
The point is that those statues, there's a reason why those statues are where they are in situ, right? You can contextualise statues, fine. You can contextualise statues with other statues. If you pull them down and you take them from where they are in situ, you're removing some of the meaning of why that is there. You put it into a museum, you contextualise.
And you say where it was. You say where it was.
Just pause a second, because I wanted to show again this picture of Colston in the museum, because one of the commentators on this has said, Femi, that is a humiliation. This guy was flesh and blood. You put him on his back with red paint all over him. That's, in its own way, not an impartial statement.
Oh, that's such a shame to have a slave trader who murdered 80,000 black people have a bit of graffiti on him.
You don't think he should be at least accorded some human dignity?
Well, I think as far as human dignity goes, we are talking about a statue. The guy died a fair while ago. As far as whether or not we should show respect to his statue, murdered and enslaved thousands of black people. And then again, we come back to the principle of Jimmy Savile. If you don't think it would be right for our society to have a statue of Jimmy Savile up, what is the difference? The fundamental difference is you could probably go for a drink with Edward Colston and he wouldn't harm you. If I were to go for a drink with Edward Colston, he'd put me on a boat. That's the difference.
Okay. Go on, respond.
I think that the point about Edward Colston statue being toppled, and also the way that it's displayed on its side. The concern is, and this is what the Save Our Statues campaign was trying to make a point about, is that this is a legitimisation of mob vandalism of heritage that you dislike. There are ways to do things that don't include pulling them down, toppling them, throwing them in the harbour, and then it being legitimised by them being put in a museum. And the reason why this is important is because a lot of the statues that are under threat are people who have ambiguous records. They're not Hitler, they're not Pol Pot, they're not people who you would say are at the furthest end of sort of the spectrum of evil if you were going to sort of place people, not that, that would be a good thing to do.
Yeah.
But the point is that, as the famous saying goes, the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every human being. No individual historical figure is either good or bad. History is complex, and so the approach to history shouldn't be to edit our public space by pulling things
or
down.
put them in museums and have all the information you need in the museum so people can actually learn about our history in context.